Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Off Code. I am Monique Duson.
And I am Kevin Briggins, and we are glad that you all are back with us today. We have a very interesting episode today. We're going to go through a video called Black America Explained. And I found this video, it came through my algorithm. I immediately clicked on it, started listening to try to, I was kind of skeptical at first, but man, it is really good. This guy does a very good job of laying out the history and explaining some things in Black America, which are some of the things that we talk about. And so I thought it'd be a great idea for us to, go through this video and react to some of these things as an episode of Off Code. To kind of, elaborate on some of the things and points that he makes. So
when you sent it to me, I thought, surely this is going to be a Black person talking about Black history, but he's not. So let's just preface that. He is not a Black guy talking about Black history, but I love it because it makes the question come right to the center of who can talk about history. What history can what person talk about? Like, can a white person talk about Black history? If Black history is nothing more than American facts that are pertaining to, Black people in America or African descendants of slaves, and they're factual, why couldn't someone of a lighter hue talk about Black history? I love the fact that he's talking about it. I do want to offer a setup because the video was so long, and we do link the entire video in the description, but because it's so long, we are only going to tackle the first part of the video, and we're actually going to do that over a couple of episodes so that we don't have just one long mega episode.
Yeah, because we know y'all don't want to listen to us that long. And so we're going to try to keep it more concise and just spread it out a little bit so that you guys aren't tired of hearing us.
All right, you ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Here we go.
In the progressive religion which dominates the modern West, African Americans are a sort of sacred caste. It's been socially taboo to criticize them. We need to redistribute resources to them. The entire culture has been built around furthering their interests. When they fail, the standards that were used to measure their failure need to be removed, and we need to restructure our entire civilizational operating system off what leftists think Black Americans want. The thing I've noticed here is that almost none of this is actually about Black America. One of the points that brilliant Black authors made in the last century, such as James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison, is that the dominant theme of Black America's history is their dehumanization. That's something I keep seeing with the current narrative about African Americans. Whenever the left, and thus our society in general, talks about African Americans.
So I feel like the video is played for 2 minutes. And he just came out really heavy with a lot of claims.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
And, I'm wondering what is the response to those claims? I don't think people are going to like it, but he said, that the sacred religion of the left sets Black people, and I think he called it maybe a progressive religion of the left.
He did.
Sets Black people in a special caste.
Yeah, a sacred caste.
Yes.
We're beyond criticism. We cannot be touched. And he is not wrong. I do want to say about this guy. So I've seen this guy in other episodes. I would describe him as maybe autistic to a degree in terms of you can tell he's really smart. But he's just going to say the thing that is the thing. He's not going to consider how it might come across. Right. I don't know
if you gotta be autistic for that.
I'm just saying I don't know what his social cues are, but he's just gonna say what he believes is true.
Mm-hmm.
You can disagree with him, but that's how he's read a lot. This guy's super smart.
He is super smart.
Yeah. And so I think he said some things that the average person might cringe at, but for him, he was like, wow, why? That's true. Yeah. And so I just wanted to put that out there. But no, he did. He started off just throwing haymakers.
Right off the bat.
but he's not wrong.
I was gonna say he ends that short little segment because I had to end. I was like, we need to talk about just unpacking this because he ends with the fact that like basically we live off our grievance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember exactly what his ending words were before we stopped with Ralph Ellison and was it Baldwin?
Yeah,
But
Baldwin.
but that we basically live from a place of our grievance.
Yeah.
That we are people of our grievance.
I mean, that's the same. Some of the
Amen
same
or
things we've
ouch.
said. Yeah, I mean, once you notice it and you notice the pattern and what he's talking about, it's easy to kind of point this out. And that's been true since I've made the statement that since the 1960s, we've learned that our grievance is our political power. And we spent the last 60 years making sure we don't lose that grievance or that power. And so he's right. Whenever you talk about Black America, is always rooted in the narrative of our oppression.
Okay, let's keep going.
Whenever the left, and thus our society in general, talks about African Americans, they never see them for what they are. Rather, whatever mental projection helps them strategically in order to gain more power or lessen their own guilt as much as possible. I'm from Philly, a plurality Black city and one of the highest concentrations of African Americans in America, surrounded by a state which is 95% white outside the major cities. What I tell my friends who are from states further north, which is where progressives tend to be concentrated, is that they don't actually understand Black culture. That since Black America completely changes its character once Black people become around a little bit more than a quarter of the population of any given area. This is why the Black community in Boston is so different from Philadelphia, Minneapolis versus St. Louis, or Seattle versus Los Angeles. What this means is that most leftists never actually relate to Black people as they truly are. This bugs me since I've consistently said before that the greatest issue modernity has is dehumanization, and I think Black America is probably the best example of this. Lots of the issues that later faced the rest of the population started with Black people, which is something that anthropologists have known for decades. This is my best attempt to create a history of Black America as a culture from Jamestown to the present. I will try to illustrate how Black America evolved into its current form and what that means. I know that our social order is completely hysterical about white people talking about Black people, but I think we all know that that's just silly at this point. I don't even think the left believes it anymore. They just use it strategically to get power. Our culture is trying to create a sort of racial caste system in which only people with certain immutable hereditary traits can speak on certain intellectual topics.
Okay, I wanted to stop there just because I don't want it to become too long and then we have to like try and remember all of the things that was said. But what I do find interesting and that I walked away with from that piece or chunk was the fact that many of the white people that are making advocacy for Blacks don't actually understand Black issues.
I mean, that's been clear for a long time. um, it's one of those things, you see the videos where they go on the street and they ask like the progressive liberal, like things about Black people, or, like voter ID laws, for example, right? And they would have this idea that Black people can't get IDs or don't have an ID. Or the mayor, or no, the governor of New York said that kids in Harlem don't know what a computer is, right? They have these wild misconceptions about Black people and Black culture. And it's like I said, it's usually rooted in their projection of what they
No.
think Black people are,
Mhm.
which makes it dehumanizing
Yeah.
because it's usually very patronizing and more kind of what you call like parental, they almost look at us as the helpless children that constantly need their help. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and that's what he said, that's his frustrations.
No, that it makes a lot of sense. I would say it's that at times that low bigotry or the bigotry of low expectations,
Yeah.
which is really rooted in an idea of, well, they're just not as good as me sometimes, or, how can they even make it?
Yeah.
But we've been making it. We are a successful people. And I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't have, our share of issues and that our communities don't need help in a lot of regards. But the help that many of the white liberals want to offer us is the help that keeps us basically under their thumb. It does not allow us true movement. It doesn't allow us to rise up. It keeps us stuck on welfare and keeps us dependent on them as our parents.
Yeah. What you said is right in terms of it's not that it keeps us on welfare. There is a segment of that. But even when we're successful, the narrative is still that we need the white progressive. We need the Democrat Party. Otherwise, we're just going to end up back in chains or we're going to end up back in Jim Crow. And so it's this constant thing of you need us. And Black people stay in this constant position of we need you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to not need them is to either hate yourself and have this internalized racism, or, it's this like not a hyper independence, but it's this you're living in like this almost like fantasy land. Like, how are you going to do it your way? How are you going to detach yourself from basically, the plantation of the white liberal master?
Yeah. Yeah. That's an analogy we use a lot in terms of getting pulled off the Democrat plantation. Yeah, that is a great way to put it. It's like, hey, you do know you're free. You don't have to be dependent upon these people, but we know that it's all rooted in their exploitation of us for their political gains. So,
All right, let's keep going.
This is clearly just a cynical power grab by the left, which is at complete odds with logic or the Western tradition. Last time I checked, our society, including supposedly the left, thought racial caste systems were bad. The left supposedly built their entire system around avoiding racial caste systems. I refuse to honor this evil and silly system. As you folks might know from my previous videos, I think the world is too complicated and too many people lie these days that I'm just going to state what I believe to be the fundamental reality of the situation without putting on 5 layers of deception and obfuscation. As we will see later in this video, the people most hurt by the layers of deception around Black America are Black Americans themselves.
Okay, so we've done a little bit of intro for the video. And the longer video, the video is broken up into 3 sections. And I think we've mentioned that we're only going to talk about the first section, which is slavery. And so let's look at that.
Part 1, Slavery. Black and white Southerners are inextricably linked. They form the South together at the same time, and it's impossible to understand one without the other. There were a few African slaves at the first English colony ever in America with Jamestown. The thing to keep in mind is that Southerners can pretty convincingly claim to be a separate nation or ethnicity from Northerners, in that the genetic differences between Northern and Southern British Americans are comparable to those between different European countries. Until the World Wars era, the northern states were nearly 100% white, with a few exceptions, while blacks were around a third of the South's population. Almost all African Americans were concentrated in the South for most of American history, and especially so the southernmost region of the South, or the Deep South. Even today, a majority of African Americans live in the former Confederate states, although there has been a huge migration across the country, mostly going to the Rust Belt, in which inner cities have become plurality black, surrounded by almost entirely white suburbs or countrysides. On top of this, there has been a migration of blacks to California, especially so Los Angeles, while most of America has at least some black people. Black authors have spoken before about how wildly different the context is between blacks in the South versus the rest of the country. In the South, Africans are a rural part of the land and culture with extended social networks that go back centuries. Although the South has had a lengthy history of pretty brutal discrimination against the Africans, they have put down roots there in a way they haven't elsewhere. From both objective data and anecdotal sources, the South isn't more racist than the rest of the country today. This concentration here is why so often the national hub of black culture is in the former Confederacy, whether Houston, Memphis, Miami, and Atlanta.
Okay, I wanted to stop it here because I think he gives us a pretty good indication of what America was like, 1619 forward, looking at slavery. He's, in the first Dixie colonies, there was, that 1619 where a lot of I don't want to just say pro CRT, but pro CRT, social justice and things like that. They always want to do the founding of America back to that 1619 when the first slaves came over. But
Which is stupid.
Well, that's
I'm just gonna be honest. That's just a dumb marker as a start of the nation. So either the nation is going to be the founding of Jamestown before slaves, or it's going to be 1776. At some point, it's a start. You can't make slaves getting here the start of the nation. That's just a stupid marker to make us feel more relevant and important.
Well, it is definitely meant to make us the center of the conversation.
Exactly.
That's what it's meant to do. But anyway, so he looks at the founding, or not the founding, but at the first slaves arriving onto the American shores, the North American shores in 1619. I think it's interesting when he does the quote unquote like heat maps of where people settle. There's still predominantly so many Black people in the South. And then when we think about the Great Migration of Blacks, during the Reconstruction era and after, and how they go up into that Rust Belt of like Pennsylvania, Ohio, all in that area.
Detroit, Michigan. Yeah.
What you don't see is nobody in Nebraska.
Or like
You're
my
not
friend,
a Nebraska type people. I mean, there's some of us, but
yeah, I had a military friend from Montana, and she was, white girl, and for some reason she only dated Black guys. And I was like, there are no Black guys in Montana. She's like, yes, there are. So apparently there's I don't know, maybe his heat map is a speck there we can't see, but she promised me that there were Black people in Montana.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to Nebraska earlier this year, I was surprised. I think I saw like 20 my whole time there, because I did count. Look, I am the one who will count. I'm not even gonna lie. I want to know what I was in Utah recently, and I was like, when did we get here?
And I was in Montana last year, and I'm pretty sure I doubled the Black population when I showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is what it's. Look, if you didn't know that Black people count other Black people when they get to a location where they think there ain't no Black people, I'm here to let you know we count.
We do.
Kind of like the little ticker when you be going through a Disneyland ride. Tick, tick, tick. Yeah, 13. Yeah, here we go.
The one thing he said that was the most interesting to me, and I think is what we miss the most about not just Black history, but American history, is the cultural differences of those who settled in the South versus those who settled in the North, right? You will not understand American history if you do not understand the difference in whites, Southerners, and white Northerners.
Yeah.
And that difference started in England. We do such a disservice when we just say, well, white, right? And try to paint white as one thing. These were different cultures. And he even said they're genetically different, And so that is one of the most interesting things to me, because, you're talking about those who settled in the South versus more of the Puritan culture of the North. I even heard one anthropologist talk about how progressivism came out of Puritan culture. And that's why they really still are Puritans, in terms of they are very big on what is orthodox and what's not. It's not rooted in a biblical framework anymore, but progressivism, they are very big on what is orthodox and what's not, and they will burn you at the stake if you don't get in line, right? They are still very puritanical. And so understanding those two cultures in the North and the South will help you understand like Black culture and how Black culture relates to different parts of the country. Hi, this is Kevin Briggins, Director for the Center for Biblical Unity. And we would like to invite all pastors and church leaders to a free webinar where we discuss how to lead your church through race and justice issues. One thing I've learned through my years in ministry is that these topics can be difficult in today's polarized culture and with various voices pulling congregants in many different directions. This is why we at the Center for Biblical Unity believe in equipping pastors to shepherd their flocks faithfully through these issues. We also believe it is important that we as Christians address race and justice from a biblical worldview. So join us September 9th as we discuss ways in which you can disciple your church on these issues while staying faithful to a biblical worldview. If this is something you believe is important, please register and also share it with someone else within your circles. Until then, grace and peace.
Well, I also think it's interesting looking at Thomas Sowell's book. What is it called? Black Rednecks and White Liberals, maybe?
Yeah.
And looking at where the culture even influenced Black people and how a lot of what we were considering like Black culture and all of this was really things that we adopted from white culture.
Yes. And
White
that's one.
culture.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things you have to understand. What we call Black culture in the South, is rooted in the South, is largely what we mimicked from Black rednecks, right? I mean, white rednecks. Yeah. And so that is why when you look at successful Black people, a lot of them come from the West Indies. You know, they come from, outside of what we call Southern Black culture. Even those in the North, we talk about people like W.E.B. Du Bois and stuff, people like that, right? They were from the North. They had a completely different culture than those who were in the U.S. South, which adopted largely what we would consider redneck culture. I used to joke with Jeff Foxworthy and his joke, you might be a redneck if I found it so relatable. Cause I'm like, you can just change it to, you might be ghetto if, right? It was so relatable.
That's funny.
And so when Thomas Sowell started talking about how similar our cultures are, I was like, absolutely.
I never really watched Jeff Foxworthy, but I might have to get in.
If you ever used a Cool Whip bowl for a cereal bowl, you might be a redneck.
Oh yeah, or like your Imperial margarine container.
Yes.
That you hold all the spaghetti in. You don't know. What was I gonna say? Oh, you know what else I thought was really interesting was that he and might need to go back just a little bit, but he mentioned that the South isn't as racist as we think.
It's not.
Well, I find that to be true when I travel there, but he brought up, I think he might have had a graphic with statistics. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. No, it's not. The South gets a very bad reputation because of its history and because so many Blacks the vast majority were in the South. And so there were just issues of living together and just natural issues when slavery ended and how do you integrate slaves into society. And now, you got people competing for jobs, that was a lot of issues that the rest of the country didn't have to deal with. And so they can look down on the tension that is there between Blacks and whites in the South because they didn't have to deal with it. But overall, racial attitudes and tensions really aren't that different across the country. People come to the South, they have a certain mindset, then they realize, man, those are the nicest people I ever met, right? I had a friend, he's from the Middle East. And when he was coming over and he was trying to decide where to go to college, his friends told him to go to the South. They said it's much better than the North. And these are brown people, immigrants with strong accents. And they were like, the South is way better than the North, And so, the South has a reputation that really isn't justified. Most people here are just pretty, Southern hospitality is a real thing. I'll say that.
Yeah, the amount of guns y'all carry, Southern hospitality.
You better be nice.
Okay, don't play no games. Don't run up on me. Okay, let's do two more clips and then we'll pick it up next week.
Although the South has had a lengthy history of pretty brutal discrimination against the Africans, they have put down roots there in a way they haven't elsewhere. From both objective data and anecdotal sources, the South isn't more racist than the rest of the country today. This concentration here is why so often the national hub of black culture is in the former Confederacy, whether Houston, Memphis, Miami, and Atlanta. One of the most insane things about wokeness, which is downstream from how the US government processes legal discrimination claims, is that wokeness demands every high-value industry have a racially proportionate structure to the national race statistics. Firstly, this is just a complex patronage system for the left to put their coalition in positions of social and economic authority. Secondly, they don't actually stand for the real balance according to racial statistics, where they're just pushing against white men's enfranchisement in every part of life. They go beyond what the 13% black stats for the entire country are, with 40% of major Hollywood roles now being black. However, the insane part of this is that America is incredibly racially diverse by region. Huge parts of America have practically no black people, and so expecting them to fulfill the national quota is just insane. Black people are 12% of America's population, and people always radically overestimate how much of America is black. For a frame of reference, there are more Americans with ancestry from the British part of Northern Ireland than there are African Americans, and there are 5 or 6 whites for every black person in America. Outside the South, Africans are practically a purely urban people who never really assimilated or related to that local area, much like the Muslims inside Europe today. Pennsylvania is a pretty de facto segregated state in which whites and blacks inhabit their own worlds and areas. In the South, there's more social understanding of the intertwined nature of whites and blacks, which goes back centuries, but is also steeped in racism being an integral part of that social structure. Interestingly, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X both thought the plight of blacks was worse in the North than the South for these reasons. It's also why black people have seen a migration back to the South over the last few decades.
I think when you look at his map and the key on the map and showing that, as we mentioned a minute ago, like the South isn't more racist than other places in America, I think that is it's so key to hit on, because you're right, the South does get a bad rap. Like, people ask me a lot, like, oh, what's it like when you go to the South? Actually, when we go to the South, I tend to find that Krista gets treated worse than I do. But in addition to that, I think the conversation of assimilation is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, and I don't know if this is and I would love to hear your thought. I don't know if this is a completely post-slavery, like ever since, the end of slavery, we've struggled to assimilate, or, is this like post 1960 that we, struggled with assimilation? I wish you would have gone into that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, just to get down to like the anthropology of it, when you have the Great Migration from the South to the North, we've already talked about how white Southerners and white Northerners are different culturally, right? And so what happens when we take a bunch of black rednecks and we get in our pickup trucks and whatever, and we drive up north, we bring a culture to Northern whites that they don't like, right? And so it wasn't simply about black people moving up. It had a lot to do with the culture in which we brought up with us, because those white Northerners would have the same rejection of white Southerners, right? If that makes sense. I think Thomas Sowell also talks about how when black Southerners moved north, it wasn't just whites who moved out of those neighborhoods. Black Northerners also moved out of those neighborhoods, right?
Mhm.
It's just a different culture that, we start parking on the grass,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, right? We're loud and we had music, like whatever. But the assimilation standpoint of, it's kind of like he mentioned like the Muslims, right, in Europe right now. So what do? When they come over, they simply huddle together in these little Muslim communities. And that's what blacks did when we migrated north. We didn't just integrate, we started huddling together in these inner cities and these ghettos, and not assimilating into any broader culture, just formulating and keeping our own same culture here in the midst of others. And when you do that, it's not very good for your social mobility, because now you're just an other that is now in a different territory. And so in terms of the cultural fit, it was a better cultural fit in the South because Black Southerners and white Southerners shared more of a common culture, than Black Southerners and white Northerners. And so that's why he talked about how a lot of people end up coming back down South. Number one, because it's cold up there, right?
Yes, it is.
Bad for your arthritis. And so you
right.
come back down South. Because even my mother in her early 20s, she moved to Chicago. My sister was born in Chicago, but then before I came along, she moved back down South, And so, you see, that migration happened where people went up for opportunities or whatever it might be, or just to experience something different. And then they eventually migrated back down to the South.
Yeah. Kevin, I thought we were going to have time to do one more clip, but we don't. So we're going to end here, everyone. We will pick it up next week with more on the video, looking at Black history and looking at what this gentleman gets right and what he may get wrong. And, just really threading through what does it mean to talk about Black history well. Kevin, thanks for the conversation, friend.
Hey, anytime.
Talk to you later.